Good afternoon. We'll just wait a quick second and wait for people to come into the meeting room. So in a moment, my name is Dr. Talitha Washington, and in a moment I will introduce our amazing panelists today. All right, so good afternoon. Welcome to the Keynote featuring New York Times journalists. So allow me first to introduce the journalists. Anjali Singhvi is a reporter and graphics editor for the New York Times. She covers a variety of topics, and her work primarily focuses on investigative visual journalism. She is a trained architect and holds a master's degree in urban planning, urban analytics from Columbia University. Anjali joined the Times in 2016. Troy Griggs is a deputy director and director of visuals for the New York Times graphics department. He was part of a team that won a Pulitzer Prize in 2018 for public service for reporting on workplace sexual harassment issues. He previously worked as a special projects editor for the Guardian's visual team in London. Before that, he worked at the Times in a number of roles, including as a designer and developer on the digital news design team and as a special projects editor in the print design department. For more information, you can check out his website, which is actually kind of funny. Check out his bio. I like it. TroyGriggs.com. Yes, it is your website. And Yulia Farshina-Kodas is the reporter and graphics editor for the New York Times. She uses her background in 3D visualization, motion graphics, and traditional animation and illustration to cover a variety of breaking news and investigative stories. You can also find her website, farshina.com. So today they're going to talk to us about how they reconstructed the neighborhood destroyed by the Tulsa Race Massacre. Using maps, newspaper clippings, testimonials, and more, this team used data science to recreate an interactive 3D portrait of the Greenwood District that was burned down in the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. The massacre took place in Tulsa, Oklahoma on May 31st and June 1st of 1921, when white residents attacked Black residents and destroyed homes and businesses of the Greenwood District, also known as Black Wall Street. So today I'm excited to learn about how they use machine learning to interpret the maps and generate this 3D model of the Black Wall Street neighborhood, and how they gathered and analyzed census data to create a Tulsa City directory database. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having us. It's such a pleasure to be here. Let me start out by I'm going to share my screen with you. And before anything else, I would love to show you what the actual experience looks like, so that as we go forward talking about it, you have it fresh in your mind. It's a combination of a more deeply written but also a heavily visual piece, and we take you right into the neighborhood of Greenwood, Tulsa, as it was before the massacre, and walk you through powerful text written by Audra Birch, who unfortunately couldn't join us today, photographs, archival photographs, and then these moments of 3D fly-throughs that tell you a lot about what the neighborhood was like. I'm just going to scroll quickly through it. These moments introduce you to one block in particular that we researched very deeply, and the businesses that were there, and the business owners that proprietors that made the neighborhood what it was. And then it takes you into the broader neighborhood, in the greater neighborhood of Greenwood, and you learn about the people who lived there, occupations they held, and then about the massacre itself. So let me just finish guiding you through, and a very lengthy methodology if you want to find out more after the session about how we've created this. So let me launch into the presentation. And Anjali, do you want to take over?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Yulia, do you want to? Yeah. Next. So archival reporting was a very important part of this project. And we started out with reporting and understanding what the neighborhood looked like, where it was in relation to the rest of Tulsa, and what kind of businesses there were, just to get a sense of a day in the life of a African-American resident in Greenwood. So we started out with reading a lot of books written about the massacre and official reports. witness accounts and reports from the Red Cross to get a sense of the written documentation. Next. And we divided our search into categories of archival materials that we needed to find from that time. And this is a screenshot of the spreadsheet for all the maps that we were able to find from the digitized online collections of in the libraries from different years. So you can see there's a couple of Sanborn maps, some street maps, and some other kind of maps that we collected and organized it in a spreadsheet. And we did the same for people that we wanted to profile. We wanted to profile stories of entrepreneurs, especially women entrepreneurs of Greenwood. And then we tried to note whether they lived on the Greenwood Avenue or not, just to be able to, if you see the piece, there's a block that we profile, which is 100 Greenwood Avenue. And so we tried to research a number of entrepreneurs and people in Greenwood. And then the third was architecture. We extensively tried to document every building that we could find in the photographs, the addresses of the buildings, their building names, and what year that photograph was from, so we could get a sense of whether that building in that photo was taken before 1921, before the massacre, or after, and be able to 3D. So next was the data analysis and mapping. We started to look at archival materials for Tulsa before 1921, and this was one of the first things we found in our reporting. It's a beautiful hand-drawn aerial illustration from 1918 from the Library of Congress. And next, please. It captured just a little bit of Greenwood in the illustration, and even though Greenwood was not fully in this view, it gave us a sense of the built-up and see what the street character was like, especially for this one block that we profiled in the story. And then we also reached out to the libraries and archivists for their undigitized collections, because we wanted to have maps and data from pre-massacre. So we had maps from 1918, but we wanted something closer to the massacre date. And some of the other maps we found were these handmade maps of street grids in districts from 1919 and 1921 that gave us a good sense of the street grids at that time. And these were, the map on the right is from the undigitized collection from the Library of Congress. And they were scanned hard copy maps of Tulsa that the librarians, worked with us to scan them and send it to us. And I'm sorry, yeah. Next, please. So as we compiled these maps from different years and started to compare these maps, we found that there were a lot of street name changes that were constantly happening over the years as the neighborhood developed, and it developed really fast. So that was one of the things to keep track of all the name changes in a spreadsheet. So if we find the street by an older name in our reporting, we would know that they were actually talking about a different street that's relevant for our purpose. So even 1 year difference was huge for street name changes. And next. This is a screenshot of from this 1921 Tulsa City Directory, an example of how they documented the street name changes. So we compiled a lot of that in a spreadsheet to track them and organize what was changed to what in 1920 and 21. But none of these maps had building footprints, and in order to actually create the digital city that you see in the piece, we needed the buildings. And we found these scans of 1915 Sanborn maps, which are fire insurance maps of Tulsa that were available to download in high resolution at the Library of Congress website. And they were broken up in different smaller parts of the city. Next, please. But we learned that from census data that population of Tulsa nearly quadrupled between 1920 and 1910. So to be able to accurately recreate Greenwood, we needed a map of footprints that's closer to 1921, and this was 1915. And then Julia found this blog that had an image of a scan of a 1920 sandbar map, and we got really excited. And it was being exhibited at the Tulsa Historical Society and Museum in Tulsa, and we reached out to them and worked with them to get the scanned copies, digital copies of the 1920 sandbar maps. And once we had these scans of the map, we wanted to turn into the 3D city. And to start with, we cleaned up the maps in Photoshop, as you see here, and stitched them together to create a wider map that we could georeference. So here you can see there are about 16 slices of smaller sections of the maps that we cleaned and put together as a single map. And then one issue we ran into by doing that was the file size. Since these scans were high resolution, there were a lot of them, and we realized that instead of manually stitching all the scans together and then georeferencing it, it might be better to georeference them individually. So our colleagues first trimmed and downsampled the full scans, georeferenced them separately, and exported a really big geotiff, which we then cleaned up in Photoshop, as you can see on the image on the right. That's all these tiny scans georeferenced and cleaned up. And then we used software called QGIS to georeference it to present day geography. Next. This is just an example of some of the issues we ran into while georeferencing streets from 100 years ago that did not exist anymore. So, the warping that you see here on the images is because we're trying to map it to where that location was in present day's geographical context. So we used references from the streets that did exist, and it was a lot of hidden trial to get it to align as accurately as possible with present day geometry. Next. And for the streets, we traced the street grid from the street grid maps that we found, and then brought it in the mapping software called QGIS and converted that into a shapefile of a street grid. And then we again exported it into a format called OBJ to bring it in a 3D software, which you see on the right here. The street grids in vector form, that's 2D. It's converted to a 3D street grid on the right. And we were able to bring the maps as textures in this software called Maya that we use for the 3D modeling to have that reference. Next. And one of the best resources we found while reporting on this piece was the Tulsa City Directory from 1921 that was digitized by the Tulsa City County Library. We downloaded these scans from their website, cleaned them, and ran OCR on them to get a data set of businesses and addresses. And any entry with a C in front of them meant that the business was owned by a Black resident. And my colleagues further cleaned the data manually after filtering all the entries with a C. And then we mapped them and highlighted them in the piece to show where the churches, schools, hospitals, libraries, and other places were. So here you see a snapshot of what that looked like in a rendered 3D form. Next. Another data that we used was the census data from Ancestry. So this was 1920 census data that we analyzed, and we tried to geocode thousands of addresses from the census data for African American residents in Greenwood, and then we tried to visualize their occupations. This is a screenshot of all the geocoded residents where they lived in Greenwood and what kind of jobs they held, to get a picture of skilled jobs, and professional jobs and service workers, and all the different kinds of the variety of jobs that were held. Next. This is the final product of visualizing that data that we use in the piece. You can see the maps visualized by professionals, skilled craftspeople, and service workers. There were a lot of professionals in Greenwood, I think, and also skilled craft people. In total, about like 60% of the total residents in Greenwood. And so eventually, next please. Eventually, we had a vector map of Tulsa from 1921, basically built from scratch. We made buildings, streets, geocoded where residents lived, added railways, enumeration districts, and also we also used data from the Tulsa, the commission report, and use information like how the areas were burned during the massacre, and also digitized them, converted them to a digital geofile. So here you can see all the different kinds of data overlapped in this the QGIS software that we used, and then we converted them into 3D, which Yulia can talk about more next, and then we rendered them.
Yeah, so converting these 2D maps into 3D geometry took a little bit of magic. Ling Dan Huan, who was our colleague at the time, trained a neural network. So he created a machine learning algorithm to go over a map, like specifically the Sanborn insurance maps that we found, and to teach them how to distinguish what constitutes a building versus every other little mark and line on the map. And it's a little bit of a trick explanation, but on the left, you see 3 columns. The one on the very left was actually a bunch of fake maps he created just to train an algorithm. I mean, he talked about it and treated it like it was like a puppy he was training to do something. He created these fake maps that looked just like the Sanborn maps we wanted to use. So the algorithm could go over that and understand what the visuals, like a very wide variety of these kinds of maps could look like. We simply didn't have enough scans to allow the algorithm to ingest as much as it needed to learn. And then all the way on the right in the column, the black and white column, is exact same fake maps, but with black and white outlining and telling the algorithm, hey, this is actually what a building is. This is what the building is, and this is how you recognize it. And so by looking at thousands and thousands of these little fake maps, and then being told through the black and white image, hey, this is actually what a building is, it learned. And so that central column is the algorithm going, oh, okay, is this the map? Is this the map? And over time, it got better and better at recognizing buildings until eventually it learned and did it on the real map, which you see, in the big picture all the way on the right, where it extracted everything into 3D geometry. This is kind of one of the passes of it trying to learn. We weren't able to teach it how to do the roads themselves, and so that had to be done manually. But the other challenge was we had information on building height and how tall the buildings in different parts of Tulsa could be, but we couldn't teach the algorithm to quite distinguish that finicky writing on the maps themselves. And so LinkedIn also created a piece of software for us to manually go in and enter the height information that we could find on the map, building by building, for a lot of the Tulsa that we represented in 3D. And then we brought that geometry into software that Anjali mentioned called Maya, which is the 3D editor we use in-house, where we could place the cameras and start staging our shots that we would export into those 3D moments that you've seen earlier in the website that I showed you. But so this was kind of our rudimentary city. It's very simple blocky shapes. And we wanted to really bring people to the ground level to let them see what a block, what a day in the life would be like, what it was like to be walking through the street. unfortunately, there were not many references. We realized that this is something that an algorithm couldn't help us with. We had to do this manually. But in order to do it manually, we needed visual references, most of which perished in the fires. These are the only two photographs that we were able to identify through meticulous search as before the massacre, and that mattered a lot because after the massacre, the neighborhood was actually rebuilt rather quickly, or at least parts of it. And this one of the liveliest blocks that we wanted to recreate was rebuilt almost brick for brick, but there were subtle differences. So it was a very careful search. We used these two photographs to glean as much as we could. So all the little anything from a sign on the Dixie Theater to a lamppost in the corner to a dentist sign was reviewed very carefully by Mika Grondal and Gilbert Gates, who were Mika is an amazing a graphics editor with an architectural background, and he is incredible at 3D modeling. And Gilbert helped him do the meticulous photo research necessary to pull this off. The research mostly consisted, because the pre-massacre photographs were so limited, the research consisted of going through hundreds and hundreds of photographs taken during the massacre and immediately after, and trying to see if we can identify the buildings on this one block we wanted to recreate, and to gauge the tiniest, minutest of details, from a window shape to the way that the distance from the curb to the height and the structure of the building. Whatever was left was useful to us. And again, we always went back and compared it to annotations on these Sanborn fire insurance maps. There were a lot of different sources. They came, some of them came from historical photographs, some of them came from newspapers, whatever we could get our hands on, because the material was so limited. And you could see in this how things were starting to come together, and there were so many uncertainties because you're only working with these two photos and the angles are tricky. So trying to go between the map to the photos and trying to understand, was it an awning over a theater, or was it more of a solid structure, and trying to do the best we can while also not exaggerating and not adding details where we couldn't find it. As you can see in this little section, when we couldn't find a detail, when we couldn't find that window or that door, or that or get clarification on what the facade looked like, we left it blank. But Mika Grunthal didn't stop there. He and Gilbert Gates found photographs that reference cars and even a street trolley later on, and they modeled these historically accurate little details that really gave you more of a sense of being present. And then, of course, we had to take this geometry and find more detailed information than just a city directory could give us about where things are located. The city directory gave us addresses and the name of a business or person, but we really had to match those addresses with the actual buildings, the actual geometry, which actually took a little bit of investigation. Just, photographs didn't have those addresses visible on them. We also we started with a city directory for identification of the businesses. That was our great data set for the whole neighborhood. But once we got down to the block level, we went through the Tulsa Star, which was the African American newspaper published out of Greenwood that covered the neighborhood in great and loving detail. And it also had the Tulsa Colored Business Directory. So this was not a complete list. Oh, I apologize. Oh dear. This was not a complete list of every business, but this was businesses that advertised, and it allows us to both check what the information that was in the city directory to make sure that the addresses were the same, and to find out a little bit more about each business. Sometimes glean a name of a proprietor, a name of a person who who owned and operated it, but also, it allowed us to find things that weren't in the city directory. Some of them, fell by the wayside and just didn't make it in, like the East End Donut Shop, or Mrs. Mabel Little's tailoring system of hair growing, which was uh, just some of the businesses that were just really meaningful to add, but were not in the city directory. One of those people was Susie Bell, who we in the city director appeared to have moved to a different location, and she was such an interesting character. We read articles about her in the Tulsa Star that painted the picture of this independent businesswoman who was a very beloved restaurateur in the neighborhood, and we really wanted to include her, but the city directory had her under a different address, and we've tracked down some articles leading up to the massacre that showed that she just some months before the massacre, she moved back onto our block, and we were able to include her as one of the people we profiled, which was just so exciting. And we also were able, in addition to the newspaper advertisements and articles and the city directory, relied heavily on Mary Joan Parrish's book, which she reported. She traveled, and she's a well-known figure at this point, but she traveled to Greenwood. But she lived in Greenwood. I apologize. She lived in Greenwood, but she also took she arrived in Greenwood a few years before the massacre, and she took the effort to report on what happened and to interview a lot of the business owners and to create a list of the losses that were suffered by the business owners of the area and proprietors. And she created this very useful list, which we could also use to um, triple check our addresses and other information. And finally, we compiled everything in Google Sheets, which became numerous and numerous. Anjali can speak more to that, but our data sheets just grew and grew and grew, and we broke Google Sheets at some point because we ran out of fields. But we were able to use them to basically feed all this data into the backend that could then display first be organized and then be displayed over the 3D renders that were created. And here are some more of the characters we profiled. I think we only ended up writing about 9 or 10 of the people on that one block, but we researched at least 30 or 40 before we had to stop, because there were 70 plus businesses on that block, and every one of those owners was fascinating. And Troy, I hand it over to you for design.
Oh, sure, yeah. So when it came time to sort of think about how we wanted to present this and to the readers, the first thing I did was sort of gather as many examples and just sort of like projects and ephemera that connected you to a particular place and or time. So sort of the static immersive idea of most big visual projects. And what you start to see was like this common pattern that there's like a line between a project being a reference to a specific time or homage, and then sort of like crossing over into parody. And we had to wrestle with that because it was a very specific time, but it wasn't like that the 1900s were actually sepia tone. Like that is not sort of the thing we wanted to promote, even though that is like the natural inclination for something told historically. You can go to the next, please. And after that, and so I like to spin up as many ideas as possible really quickly. So, and then turn it sort of all the way up and then scale back and see what details we want to keep versus one we want to throw away. We have these moody, high speed sort of animations on dark backgrounds, these dramatic quotes, next. And we had this like tumbling news feed of like old clippings. And after that, we also had just like a general typographic treatment a general typographic treatment that was very much more evocative of like an old school newspaper or something you might see of that era, centered around the Tulsa Stars, as Yulia pointed out. But then next, let's see. And then, and just like multiple columns of print, or multiple columns, all these sort of black and white images stacked together, just a little bit more than initially an idea that we thought had some legs. But the more you go through it, the more you ultimately realize that the piece itself is like the design, so that reconstructing this town, the detailed stories and the lives of the people who live there are the design elements, and itself is a design piece. And so that helped us make visual choices that better reflected that. Next, maybe I think it's the next three. Yeah. like the next three. So we started with this old photograph, and we simply said, we are taking you into the past via this old photograph and bringing you into what that would actually be. So then in the end, we created this perfect transition from old photograph to immersive full screen experience that just like brings you to the place. And instead of trying to create the trappings around it that would ultimately compete with the story we're trying to tell, we were able to make choices that helped elevate those things. So if you go next. And so we had these moments that could feel like they came from or feel like they shared the same DNA as old newspaper clippings, but didn't go so far as to distract from the story we were trying to tell. Subtle things in this include, we had slight gradient overlays over as you enter the 3D experience, which you can't even really notice on the screen unless they weren't there, but it helps blend the background into the reading experience. So as you're reading, you can really just feel like you're in that place, or we're actually dropping you off into that place. Next. We also did the entire color palette really centered around what the 3D modeling was best for the 3D modeling, but it created this soft palette evocative with grays and tans and golds that we tried to subtly express and move through different aspects or different assets that we had to play with, from the highlighting of the maps to all the photo captions have like a slight lowered opacity. They're semi-transparent so that they pull in some of the background color. Even the slides with the person in the car, and this as the slides are going across the 3D space, they're semi-transparent, but they also have a tannish goldish drop shadow instead of a traditional black, to sort of move away from the idea of creating something that felt too stark. So even though we wanted it to feel authoritative and severe and intense, because it is an incredibly sensitive and important topic, we also didn't want to feel stagnant by that, and moving subtly away from it to standard black and white sort of helped us in that space. Next. And so that hopefully created the experience that we wanted and allowed the cameras and the content to shine. And then after that, as much as we realized that the story itself was a design, we realized the story itself is a piece of important data that they've collected and cleaned and crafted. And we really wanted to make that data public so that it could be of use to researchers and historians and any interested party that would want to do more than experience this information as a piece of reported journalism and actually want to engage with the data themselves. And hopefully all this came across in the finished product. But yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. That was really informative. And as you probably know, there's been a lot of chatter in the chat, so to speak. And I'm just going to echo one of my colleagues, Professor Barbara Combs, who says, everyone has a role in the project: cultural anthropologists, sociologists, historians, mathematicians, photographers, mappers, geographers, economists, and journalists. Talk about a project that will help students connect to the dots. This is amazing. And I echo her comments that your work is amazing. And somebody asked, how much time did the whole project take? That's a good question.
Well, there is the amount of time we wanted it to take, and then there's the amount of time it took. We started looking into it in January, February of 2020, because we knew this was going to be a very important story for us, and we wanted to give it the time it deserved. For about a month, we casually, slowly started looking at all the archival information available, and then March 2020 happened, and everything got put on hold. Everyone was fully all hands on deck on reporting on COVID and other events that were happening at the time, and so we didn't fully get back to the reporting until January or February of 2021. I want to say it took us about 6 months worth of work, but it was really compressed into a 3-month time, which is not a realistic schedule for a project of this magnitude. It was 3.5 months of 7 days a week and like all-nighters. So yeah. It's a very long answer to your question.
Wow. It's very impressive. And somebody says, wow, I would have never thought to look at the window shades. So can you talk a little bit more about some surprise things like, wow, we should need to look at this? Or what were some surprises that you all encountered along the way?
I wish our colleague Mika and Gilbert would be able to be here to answer it more fully. But as I mentioned, there were so few visual references for reconstructing things manually that once we got into the I might have misspoken. I apologize. It wasn't window shades, but the window frames, that were left over in a lot of the photographs of the burned buildings. And so, it could have been a window just to kind of understand how to shape that window in our 3D model or a doorway. There was a fire hydrant, search where they were trying to compare where the fire hydrant was in two different angled photos and the map, and so they were able to figure out the right positioning of other things in relation to it. A sign on a door. I'm trying, Anjali, and please jump in if you remember other details. There was like a lamppost, a box, like a fire. I don't even know what to call it. It wasn't a fire hydrant, but like a box you'd call a fire service.
I remember our colleagues spent a long time to confirm an awning on one of the buildings because it appeared on a sandbar map, and you could see it like faintly in one of the photos, but we weren't like 100% sure. So they spent a long time to confirm that, and then finally model. So definitely a lot of care put into the details to make sure we're able to recreate it as accurately as possible. Yeah,
there were many photographs of rubble and destruction, but they were not always identified as a particular location. And so one detail that colleagues mentioned before was a safe. These locations, these businesses were looted, and there was one safe which I guess was maybe too heavy to carry away, but it was sitting in a street, and that one safe helped identify a number of photographs belonging to a specific block that we were interested in.
And about how many team members were involved in the project?
I just looked that up while we were sitting here. I saw it in the Q&A. I cheated a little bit, but it's about 20, it's like 27. I just literally pulled the credits from the page, but that doesn't even count like our boss and other people who sort of like externally had other input. Timing wise, I couldn't even begin to tell you how much time that took, but it was sort of shocking that our editor on this project, Han Park, who managed all this, it's a team of a similar number that we have to run in like our COVID tracker. Like the ability to devote this many people to a project that we deemed this important is kind of really lucky and beautiful thing about working at the New York Times, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I've never worked on a team of this size or with so much time devoted to a project before.
Yeah, I think a few of us were on it full time for the duration of the project, and some were pulled in stages of the project depending on where we were and what we needed.
So did you all have a target audience in mind when preparing? So when you were creating these 3D visualizations, did you have a target audience in mind, or what was the intent? What was the driver? Because it sounds like a lot of late nights.
I don't know if it was a target audience. I mean, Troy and Anjali, correct me if I'm wrong. We wanted the world to see what it was like to be there. I don't know if it was a specific audience in mind. It was more of trying to do our best to convey what the neighborhood had before it was taken away.
Yeah, I would agree. I feel like the only thing I would say that, and to address a little bit of that, is that our target audience is always going to be the New York Times audience to some degree, and that audience we want to be everyone. So we do want to expand. As it is, it's who we have now as our target audience is ever shifting target, hopefully to be more inclusive of more people at all times. I would think visually, one of the things that I'm happy with what we did was that when you see similar projects like this, we didn't make it so much of a spectacle in terms of how people engage with it with like overly crafted, overly stylized elements and things like that that would almost sort of move it into a thing that you sort of don't truly engage with as a thing that actually happened, which, you know, everyone has the best intentions when they design things in that way. But I am happy that we showed enough restraint to treat it as, to take it seriously. So I would say if there was any aspect of a target audience, it would be somebody hopefully who was open to engaging with this as a thing that really happened and had consequences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how did the team make decisions when you were all less sure about the details and couldn't find more information to guide the decision in a particular direction?
It's a great question. I think majority of our time in this project was spent in verification. Correct me if I'm wrong, Yulia, but it was a lot of we really made sure that every detail we included in the piece was verified in at least 2 or more sources. So if you weren't sure about something in one source, we tried to find a second or a third or something else. And we interviewed historians as well and read books. So yeah, I think in terms of the details, and if we weren't sure, we just did not include it and found a way to work around it, especially in the architectural 3D modeling of Greenwood.
There have been, I kid you not, 1 a.m. huddles where everyone had to jump on a video call and discuss a source. We've used 3 sources: the city directory, the newspaper, Tulsa Star, and then the list of losses from Mary Jones Parrish's book. And it was a lot of no, it says this here, no, but it's off by one number here. What do we do? 1 in the morning.
That's some good determination. We thank you for that. Was there any new software that you all had to learn for the project?
I think we used new technology for this project that we didn't before. Lingdong, our colleague that Yulia mentioned, used this machine learning algorithm that the software that he made to input heights of the buildings and maps. So he did that from scratch. So that was the first time he was able to do that. But for the rest of the project, I think we knew the softwares. There were a lot of them used, and we sort of had those skills in the team.
Nice. So if you all had unlimited time and resources, what would you have done that you weren't able to do, or that you didn't do? Right? There's always that, oh, that would have been a good idea if we had more. And it could also be more information too.
I think
yeah.
No, go ahead.
I'm trying to remember one of the brainstorming sessions with our editor. We wanted to, so there was just so much information that we had learned and researched that we wanted to include a lot of it. Like Yulia mentioned that, there were so many individual people and entrepreneurs researched, but we were only able to include 6. So in a way, there's a lot that did not make the project. That's, it will always live in our Google Docs and Sheets in that sense. But yeah, I think I'm personally, I'm very happy with the way it turned out, the final piece, and I'm happy with all the things that we decided to include and make that as a full experience. So.
Awesome. So someone asked, were you able to get feedback from any of the family members of surviving Tulsa Massacre victims?
Yeah, I mean, that was a very special part of the project for me, at least. Audra Birch, who could not be here with us, traveled to Tulsa, met with descendants of the massacre survivors who still live in the area, walked the streets with them. And well, one of my favorite stories was she met one of the people that we profiled, one of the Nails brothers who owned a shoe repair shop on the block. She met, and they were also involved in the music business and just were such interesting people. Audra met with I believe the granddaughter, correct me if I'm wrong, Anjali,
Yes.
of one of the brothers, and she said, "Hey, a week ago I went down to the historical society and I was able to identify the photograph of my grandfather. I mean, previously we didn't have a photograph of this person because they were not as high profile in the neighborhood. At least they didn't have any surviving media." And so she was able to connect us with a photograph in the historical society that was unidentified when we began the research. And so, yeah, not only did we have the benefit of hearing from the family members, but we were able to add that visual element to the piece.
And I echo this. Vernon Myers, echo your comments. He says, "Thank you for putting the appropriate time into telling the story of the Tulsa Massacre. I am speechless." He said, "I saw the piece when it came out, but to hear how it happened makes mean so much more." So thank you all for that. Somebody asked a question, mathematician. He says, "Can you say more about the role of the machine learning algorithm in the 3D experience?"
Well, the machine learning algorithm was crucial in helping us to translate these 2D maps into geometry, because if we had to do it manually, we literally worked to the last minute of publishing, adjusting and perfecting our 3D scenes. I don't know how we could have been able to pull it off if that part wasn't automated. So the learning algorithm allowed us to take these maps, and instead of manually going in and tracing these building shapes, we were able to have a machine trace them, extract them, and then another piece of software allowed us to enter manually, but still, the software raised the height of the buildings for us. So that part was crucial for us to be able to get this out in time. I mean, it was a vast area that we ended up turning into geometry. The one block that we did manually had to be done manually. No machine can do that level of research and understanding and sensitivity to the shapes. But it was a combination of human effort and machine learning. I wish I could do it justice. There is an MIT Open article where we have about a few paragraphs talking about it in a little more detail, if it helps, that I can actually put in chat as we talk.
Awesome. So somebody asked, did you have an image in your minds ahead of time, like a film storyboard, or was the final product an emergent from the process? And it sounds like it really was an emergent from the process and making sure it was grounded in the available data.
Yeah, I feel like Yulia and I both had a visual reference doc of illustrators and other projects, and even just examples of 3D transitions that we liked. Anjali worked on storyboarding. We had sketches everywhere. I think on some level you do start with some ideas of how you, just in order to work, right? Just in order to get started, you have to have some sort of loose framework in your brain for what it could be, but it has to be loosely held, right? You sort of have to be able to separate yourself from it and pivot when the story itself starts to emerge. So it's almost both. You do need to walk in with a thesis statement, but not one that you feel so beholden to that the story can't change your mind or alter your direction. Because we definitely went in a lot of different directions before we settled on where we are right now. And I love where we are now with it. So it just felt like it told us what it wanted to be. But
Very cool. So what kinds of lessons did you all learn in the process that you'll take on for subsequent, maybe similar projects?
Take more time.
Yeah, time is definitely one of them. I think in terms of the archival research, getting to getting the undigitized collections from the libraries was something I'd never even thought of before working on this project, and that opened a lot of future possibilities for me. There's just so much data and maps and documents available that we don't know, but it's amazing. It's just amazing.
Being able to go in person would have meant a lot. I mean, it was in the heat of the pandemic, and it was just very difficult to travel. A lot of these places were not fully opening at the time, so it made it very difficult. But when we began the research in 2020, before the pandemic, it was definitely our goal to go in person, to be in Tulsa, to go and see these materials and find things to scan. I wish more of us than Audra could have gone.
Have you all been? All right, I'll see what
No.
I can do, make that connection, See, I'm not a real big party planner, but hey, if it's some machine learning, some data, all right, I'll see what I can do, make a connection there. So what would you say, there was both an art and a science involved in this piece? And if so, could you share about how these combine to be more influential than just art or science alone?
Well, I could speak a little bit to it, then you two could jump in. But I feel like maybe about a year ago, our boss Archie said something. We were having a conversation about design and data visualization, and we love it. It's our chosen field. Wouldn't do anything else. But its nature, it reduces and flattens what is like essentially the human experience into something that you can quantify and understand. So you take the number of deaths in a place and you turn it into a number of deaths, and that number makes it less emotional just because it is now a number and not a thing. So what we were challenged with, and we were challenging each other with a year ago, was what's an emotional infographic? Like, what is a graphic that has emotional weight, and what is, and how, and if one doesn't exist, how does one create it? So I started a doc of exactly that, just trying to figure out what are the best examples of graphics that have some sort of emotional element to them and can create a sense of experience versus a sense of analysis. And that sort of led me through, I think when we were doing this project together, it led us, I think, away from the idea of like certain illustration styles, certain format styles, certain ideas of how to present this, that made it less about it's like the art of the science instead of just art and science. So the idea that these buildings, these are pure, the building is a pure work of like reporting and development and machine learning and all these different facets, but it itself is, as a thing that is a representation of a thing, is art. So there isn't really as strong of a line as we think there is if we open ourselves up to it in that way. If we had just counted the number of buildings and lost businesses, then we would have failed in our sort of chosen path. But by pushing towards the bridging of art and science, by pushing towards thinking of the work itself as the art, it allowed us to tell a truer story of the place, and then hopefully bring you to it in a way that made it feel like it, or made it resonate.
So at any point did this story get emotionally hard? Because whenever I go into these stories and kind of think through what would it be like to be there, and the person, one of the survivors, when she testified, she said she could hear screaming. Was it a point where you were just kind of like, gosh, just, I don't know. Sometimes I just get emotionally overwhelmed when I think about how could things like this happen, and when things like this did happen, to actually kind of relive in my mind what that would be like in that experience. So how did you handle the emotional connection with the article, and how did it impact you all emotionally?
It was, I mean, we try to focus on what was there, and that part of the research, when you sort of divide it in your mind from what then happened, was gave me such joy to learn about these people and to see people accomplish. But then when you stop and you realize that all that was taken away, it was heartbreaking, especially once we researched the stories of, not everyone was able to recover. Not everyone. I think most of the people we profiled, well, all of the people that we profiled deeply, they lived through it, but they lost so much, and that was heartbreaking. But the background research of understanding the massacre and the events, especially, Mary Jo Jones Parrish's, stories, and then stories, that she captured of people who lived through it. It brought me to tears. It was just so sad, and just, the families and the children running from fire and describing the horror of it all was unimaginable.
Yeah,
But I
feel
think
like
the story is so much more meaningful. Sorry.
no, I completely agree. I feel like we, as graphics editors and the kind of work that we do, we're kind of always looking at awful stuff, and you do have to, in a protective way, have to sort of like detach a little bit in order to get it done at all. Otherwise, you just crumble. But I also think that this project, until you get to the last section, truly is kind of amazing. Like, it has this beautiful like recreation. It's so many of these stories are solely focused on the destruction and the horrors that happened, that it actually was kind of beautiful to just read about all these Black businesses and all these people who had all this. Like, that moment in time was sort of lost to me, because it was we often only experience like Blackness in the media through trauma, and not through just the wonderful lives that they led until that point, of just how hard they worked, and how amazing it was to even have a place like that exist. It wasn't really until Audra's words hit the page that I started to feel like,
That's true.
Okay.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's I think the stories of these people will always stay with us. We learned so much about Greenwood and the people of Greenwood, and in the initial conversation that we had, we really tried to highlight who they were and then celebrate what they had achieved in Greenwood. And that's what the piece does. Like Troy said in the first three sections, and the later, of course, it's just really heartbreaking to see how quickly and how much it destroyed for generations.
Thank you. And have you all gotten feedback from educators and how they discuss the Tulsa Race Massacre now with your article and research as a resource tool?
We have, yeah. We've talked to a lot of folks from who reached out to us who are working in Tulsa on Greenwood, and students have reached out to us as well, and some people have used the data, also the open data, and
Yeah, great. And so, somebody asks, thinking about way back when, from college to now, how do you all feel that your college or educational experiences prepared for you to do this type of work in your careers?
Well, I mean, I could just say, like, I went to an HBCU and I studied graphic design and journalism. So
Go ahead, say
sorry, I went to Florida A&M. Yeah.
Would you have to do you do the Rattler as well?
Sure do.
Okay.
But yeah, but I feel like this project is probably one of the only projects I've ever worked on that really intersected all three of like my college experiences, and that around a bunch of Black people, a bunch of ambitious Black people doing graphic design and journalism. Like, it really did pull it all together for me in a way that was kind of shocking to see. I mean, I don't know if I'd ever get such an opportunity again. I hope, but it was great. It shockingly prepared me quite well.
Nice.
I studied 3D animation in college, and I worked in a lot of advertising related fields before finding my way into museum work and then journalism. And so I feel like this project was everything I wanted to do, that when I was miserable at 3 a.m. in the morning working on 3D advertisements of sneakers, I wanted to have meaningful work that looked at history and culture, and I feel like this project had it all, everything I've ever wanted to work on.
I have an architecture and urban planning background, and data analytics as well. So it was, again, like Troy knew, it was just I was able to use a lot of my backgrounds and skills in this project, and it's just, again, yeah, it was a dream project.
Awesome, thank you. Someone asked, were you all considering doing a project for Wilmington, North Carolina, about there's a Wilmington insurrection of 1898, also known as the Wilmington Massacre of 1898, where there was riots and insurrections carried out by white supremacists on the Black residents there.
We actually we actually did start researching on Wilmington pretty heavily as a follow-up that we wanted to do. So we looked into other massacres around that time, and Wilmington was one of them. Yulia, I think, did the main research on that, and we'll probably come back to it. There were, like, there's always news happening, so we have to prioritize projects. But yeah, definitely, this is an area we're going to continue to look into and report on.
Yeah, one thing. Sorry, go ahead, Troy.
No,
Yeah.
go ahead.
One thing I wanted to say is that Tulsa was a unique case, and we didn't realize how unique, because we were able to get the right maps, the right city directories and census data, and the newspaper. The newspaper really made a difference. And in a lot of places, including Wilmington, that we looked at that had massacres, it's one of the elements was missing, and we realized how tough it is to pull the data together without one of those ingredients.
Also, I do hope that we, as much as important as it is, and that we do, and obviously we plan to continue doing more of it, I hope that it sparks other places and organizations to do more of it as well, because I would hate to be the only voice or the only place reporting on these kinds of things, because our perspective is going to be ours, and it's going to be through the lens of the New York Times, and we kind of need more places to get involved and more perspectives to be shared, so that as a society and as a news gathering sort of field, that we continue to push each other and sort of continue to grow, and that people engage with the work. I would be personally sad, as happy as I would be to keep working on telling these kinds of stories. I'd be sad if people missed that the point was to engage with it and to grow with it from that, instead of just like waiting for the next piece from us to come to tell them about it. But so
it takes us all, right? It takes us all to do the work. No, this has been great. I've been so enwrapped. I just realized that we were over time, but this has been a really great discussion going between really that it takes us all to address and uncover the real truths. And I really appreciate all of the work that you all did in telling the story, in using data science to do it. And I really thank you all for coming here today and sharing with us. There are items in the chat. All of these talks here today are recorded, and they'll be embedded in the platform, and the chat will be there too. So feel free to browse on by at your leisure, as you all wish. But again, thank you all for joining us for this panel. At this time, we'll just take a 30-second break, and then we will go to our closing session, where the Deputy Director, Dr. Justin Ballinger, will give us some closing remarks to close out our day. Thanks again.
Thank you so much
for having us.
Thank you so much.